I am now 16 years old, but the events that changed my life forever took place just last year when I was 15. Back then, my younger brother Bob was only 13 years old. We lived alone with our dad in a house near the countryside. Our mother had never taken any responsibility for us, so it was just the three of us trying to make a life together. It was a quiet, simple existence where we mostly kept to ourselves. But everything shattered on a bright, clear afternoon while we were coming back from our tuition class. The walk home from tuition was usually a very routine part of our day. My dad worked long hours at his job, often leaving the house well before we even woke up. Bob and I were very used to managing the 2-mile trek by ourselves. We always took the exact same single route to get back to our house every day. On this afternoon, the sun was shining brightly and it was a beautiful, clear day. The heat felt heavy and still as we walked along the path that cut through a wide farm area. The road was lined with long, towering trees that cast thin shadows across the dirt. Bob was walking just a few paces ahead of me, clutching his school books tightly in his arms. Everything happened in a sudden blur of motion that I still struggled to process. As we moved through the quiet farm area, a red van pulled into view from the distance. Its engine was idling with a low, menacing hum that seemed out of place. As the van slowed down to a crawl right beside us, Bob stumbled slightly. The books he was carrying slipped from his grip and scattered all over the dry ground. I stopped immediately to help him pick them up, but as I looked up, I saw the side door of the van slide open. A large, muscular man leaped out. Before I could even open my mouth to shout a warning or ask what was happening, the man grabbed Bob by the waist and dragged him violently into the vehicle. Panic seized my entire body. I stood frozen for a split second in utter confusion, unable to understand what was happening in front of my eyes. The man then turned his attention toward me. He stepped back out of the van, his frame appearing massive and imposing in the bright daylight. I finally found my voice and began to scream for help as loud as I could. My legs finally kicked into gear and I bolted away as fast as I could. I realized then why he had chosen this spot for the attack. It was a very quiet area where no other people were living close enough to hear my cries. As I ran, I risked a quick glance back over my shoulder to see how close he was. The man was gaining on me quickly. In that moment of high adrenaline clarity, I actually managed to get a good look at his face. My heart stopped. Despite the short-cropped hair he was wearing now, I recognized him. It was my uncle. My mind began to race with 1,000 questions. I wondered why on earth he was there and why he was doing this to us. I knew for a fact that my uncle had been in jail, so I could only assume at the time that he had been let out on parole. I tried to scream out his name, asking him through my gasps for air why he was doing this, but he remained chillingly silent. He was far too fast and much too strong for a 15-year-old boy to outrun for very long. Within seconds, he had caught up to me. His heavy hands pinned my arms tightly to my sides, cutting off any chance of escape. He dragged me back toward the red van. He threw me inside the dark interior right next to my terrified brother. He slammed the heavy doors shut, and the van sped away from the farm area. Later that evening, my dad returned home from work only to find the house completely empty. When he realized we were nowhere to be found, he became frantic. He eventually began to piece together the truth of what might have happened. He went directly to my mother's house, suspecting that she was involved in our disappearance. When he arrived there, he found exactly what he feared. We were there with her. It turned out the entire kidnapping incident had been orchestrated by my mother. It was all her idea to have our uncle snatch us off the street. The police arrived at my mother's house shortly after my dad did. However, before the authorities could take us back home, my mother insisted on a strange request. She wanted to speak to Bob and me separately in private. I still do not know exactly what she said to my brother behind those closed doors, but I could tell that something in Bob changed fundamentally that day. When the time finally came for us to leave and go home, Bob did something I never expected. He flatly refused to go back home with my dad. Even when my dad reached out to take us, Bob stayed by our mother's side. The police took my uncle back to jail immediately. They charged him with kidnapping, and his situation was made worse because of his extensive past criminal records. My mother stayed in her home. My dad and I were forced to leave without my brother. Since that day, my brother has never come back home to live with us. I am 16 years old now, and I still live with my dad in the same area. Every day I think about that walk home. The sun still shines on the farm area and the long trees still line the road, but our family was never the same after that afternoon. I often look at the empty space where Bob used to be and realize how quickly a single sunny day can turn into a nightmare that never truly ends.
In high school, I was on the volleyball team, and despite being pretty good at the game, I was always the center of jokes for being lean by the muscular guys on my team. Though I always laughed at the joke, it stung like a bee. One day I was standing there with my so-called friends, minding my own business, when I overheard Marty comment on my legs being similar to those of a flamingo. Before I could even react, he and Pablo erupted in laughter, as if they had just heard the funniest joke in the world. But the joke was on me, because they didn't even need to mention my name for me to understand that they were talking about me. The hurt and embarrassment I felt were overwhelming. I couldn't bear the thought of staying in that locker room, so I fled without even bothering to change into my team uniform. I turned off my phone so no one could contact me and ran to a nearby park, where I sat on a bench for hours, lost in thought. All I could think about were the insults and cruel words they had hurled at me. It was clear to me that none of them had ever cared about my feelings. It was then that I made a decision. I would show them that I was more than just a target for their jokes. I would join the gym and work on my appearance until I was strong and confident. They would see that their words had no power over me. My neighborhood had a gym, so I decided to go there. However, the thought of being ridiculed by my friends for my physique if they saw me there made me dread the idea. To avoid such embarrassment, I planned to go there right before closing, hoping no one would be there. Upon entering the gym, I was greeted by the sounds of clanking weights and the smell of sweat. I noticed a female instructor aligning the equipment and putting it in their places. She seemed to be the only instructor present at that time. With a hesitant approach, I walked over to her, her piercing gaze making me uneasy. After scanning me from head to toe, she finally spoke, her voice laced with skepticism. She explained the timing and membership plans, but her tone made me feel like an outsider. Although I wanted to try out the gym first before deciding if I wanted to continue with my membership, I couldn't muster the courage to say it out loud. It felt like the instructor had already decided about me, and I didn't want to give her any reason to think less of me. Eventually, I did what she told me to do before exiting the gym, feeling disappointed and demotivated. As I walked away from the gym, I couldn't help but notice a group of young men around my age giggling and playfully pushing each other as they made their way inside. I wondered if they were there for the same reason as me. Nevertheless, I didn't pay it much attention and continued walking. Determined to stick to my routine, I had planned to hit the gym at the crack of dawn, 6 a.m., to be precise. So I woke up half an hour before my usual time, took a warm and refreshing shower, put on my most comfortable workout clothes, and set off towards the gym, feeling energized and ready to start my day. Upon arriving outside the gym, a sense of excitement pulsed through me. I had been looking forward to this day. However, my excitement quickly turned to dismay as I was met with a male instructor who informed me that the gym was closed for the day. I turned to find the disappointment etched on the faces of the other gym-goers around me too. Suddenly, the sound of police car sirens filled the air, causing everyone to freeze. 2 officers emerged from the car and walked briskly towards the gym entrance. They gave us a stern warning to leave the premises immediately. Confusion and shock washed over me, wondering what could have happened to cause such an abrupt halt to our workout plans. I walked back to my house with confusion still swirling around in my mind. I went about getting ready, but my heart wasn't into it, for I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. The sight of police officers outside the gym was still fresh in my mind. Suddenly, my phone rang, and an unknown number appeared on the screen. I hesitated before answering, but something inside me urged me to pick it up. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Officer Kenneth, his tone serious and stern. He asked me to come to the police station immediately without explaining. My heart started pounding with fear, even though I couldn't think of any reason why the police would want to talk to me. While approaching the looming police station, my heart pounded with anxiety and confusion. The officer's stern and unreadable expressions only added to my unease. Instead of divulging any information, They immediately focused on me and began questioning me about the gym. They wanted to know if I had enrolled during its closing hours, leaving me bewildered and uncertain of the relevance of their inquiry. I nodded in agreement, trying to hide my growing trepidation. The officers continued questioning, demanding to know why it had taken me so long to enroll. I hesitated, feeling as though I was on trial, but eventually explained that I had been terrified of being ridiculed by my friends. They inquired if I had noticed anything or anyone peculiar. After pondering momentarily, I responded that I hadn't seen anything unusual. However, I did recall seeing 4 young boys enter the gymnasium after me, presumably to sign up for a membership. To my surprise, the officers seemed taken aback by my statement and informed me that there was no record of anyone signing up after me. Moreover, they added that the CCTV footage had been stolen, making it impossible to verify my claim. As I handed over the description of the 4 guys to the officers, I could feel my heart beating faster. I was curious about what had happened and couldn't resist asking, excuse me, but may I know what happened? Officer Kenneth took a few seconds to respond, his expression serious. Gym instructor Sarah was kidnapped last night, he said, his voice low and grave. I stood there, petrified for a few seconds, upon realizing that they were probably suspecting me of her kidnapping before I silently walked out of there. The journey back home was a difficult one. Every step felt like a burden, and I could feel the world's weight on my shoulders. I couldn't help but let the tears flow as my mind replayed the day's events. All I wanted was to join the gym to avoid the constant jabs from my friends about my weight. I had hoped that changing my physique would improve my confidence and self-esteem. Little did I know that my decision would lead me to being falsely suspected of something I didn't even do. The sense of injustice and betrayal left me feeling lost and alone, with no one to turn to. As I was driving Ella to her competition, focused on not being late, she nudged me and pointed to the side of the road. A man who seemed to be under some influence was getting arrested. There are many cases like this you witness daily while driving where people get arrested for breaking the rule. But looking at the arrest, I was reminded of an incident that happened in the past. It was a lovely Saturday morning, and I was driving to work down the interstate. When I woke up that morning, I received news that my manager, who makes our work life harder than it should be, would be absent. So, I was in a pretty good mood. I had no idea at the time what else my morning had for me. The road was relatively quiet, and since I had left my house early, I was in no hurry. My favorite song played on the radio, and I sang along, tapping my fingers on the steering wheel. As I drove in the middle lane, I glanced in the rearview mirror and noticed a black car approaching at a high speed. The driver was breaking the speed limit, and I watched as he quickly passed me. However, something alarming caught my attention. A woman was banging on the window of the car and screaming at the top of her lungs. Even though I only saw her briefly, I was sure of what I saw. Her hair was tangled and disheveled, and her clothes were crumpled and messy. I couldn't quite make out what was happening in the hazy distance. However, as someone with 5 loving sisters, seeing a woman in distress was enough to spur me into action. A sudden wave of determination washed over me, and without a second thought, I stepped on the gas and surged towards the black car. I started following it, not entirely sure of what was happening inside. The woman in the car seemed to have noticed me following them and began to scream. I could see from her lips that she was frantically asking for help. In a state of panic, I took out my phone and pressed 911 on the dialing pad. I brought the phone closer to my ears while trying to match the car's speed to avoid losing it. After a second ring, a female dispatcher answered the call. 911, what's your emergency? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, and said, Hello, ma'am. I'm following a black sedan, and there's a woman inside screaming. She's probably being held against her will. I quickly told the dispatcher the highway I was on, and as I did, I noticed the car slowing down. The driver had probably realized he was being followed. I also slowed down, keeping a safe distance behind them, my heart pounding with fear. I noticed the man turning back, stretching his hand to grab something. For a second, I thought he had a gun or something, so I tried to stay out of his sight. But he took a belt and started hitting the woman while saying something I couldn't understand. My eyes widened, and I told the dispatcher about what I was seeing. The dispatcher reassured me that she had alerted the cops in the area. The man suddenly stopped the car, and I also had to push the brakes. Then, all of a sudden, he opened his door and stepped outside. My eyes followed the gun in his hand as he drew nearer. But before he could do anything, I noticed a police car approaching, and he ran back into his vehicle. The police started chasing him, and even though I didn't have to follow them anymore, I couldn't help being worried about the woman. He couldn't get far and was pulled over. I exited my car and stood there, watching as the cops handcuffed him on the ground before escorting him inside their vehicle. My eyes trailed the man's car, where the woman was still sitting while sniffling. One of the cops approached her and asked if she was okay before they asked what was going on and if she knew the man. The woman started wailing as she began to tell everything, but no one could make out her words, so the cops offered her water and tried to calm her down before questioning. After about half an hour, she finally stopped crying and started telling them what happened. That morning, when she was getting ready for work, someone knocked on her door. She went there to open it, and when she saw it was her ex, she told him to go away since she didn't want anything to do with him. But he pushed his way inside and grabbed her by the hair before he started beating the shit out of her. Eventually, he knocked her out, and when she was unconscious, he loaded her inside his car and started driving to God knows where. When she finally regained her senses, she started banging on the window and asking him to let her go, but he kept hitting her and telling her to shut up if she didn't want to die. He told her he didn't want to let her go, but since she was stubborn about getting away from him, he had no choice but to do this to her. That was when I noticed her screaming. The woman said he abused her even during the relationship, so she broke up with him. I was asked to give a statement that day, and since I had the recordings of the phone conversation with the operator, I gave them to the detectives a week later. I hope to know the case's progress, but haven't heard anything since. They told me they would be in touch, but it's been 2 years since that incident, and I have no idea if he got punished for what he did or not. I'm glad I followed them that day, because that creep would have done something unspeakable to her if I didn't. Even the thought of something like that makes me shudder with horror. Ella, can you promise me something? I asked her as she was about to exit the car. What? She asked hurriedly. Tell me whenever you meet a guy and think about dating him. She rolled her eyes at my words. You've told me this 1,000,000,000 times, Alex. Don't worry. I won't fall for a bad guy. After saying this, she walked out of the car. There are all kinds of psycho people in the world. I feel horrible for those who meet them and end up suffering because of them. That was why I'm cautiously overprotective about my sisters, for I never want them to get hurt.
My name is Cameron Wheeler, and I'm 26 years old. The incident I'm going to tell you about happened with my sister, who is no more. During this incident, she was killed, but it was her own fault, and just with her little mistake, she lost her life. Her name was Maria, and she was 3 years younger than me. I was the eldest son in the family, Arian was the youngest, and in the middle was Maria. Our parents owned a fabric shop in the nearby market area, and they were always busy with their work. It doesn't mean they didn't love us. They do, and always tried their best to provide us with suitable time. But what can I say? After all, work comes first. I understand them. What they were doing was for the sake of all three of us. I was working in a small game development company, but since I was a newbie, my income was not that much. I had to live a little far away from the birthplace of my work. I rented an apartment, which was not good enough, but I had to adjust because that was the best I could afford with my income. After I was gone, Maria and Arian were alone at home until Mom and Dad arrived from the shop. Maria was in her final year of graduation, and Orion was much younger, and he was in his schooling age. Mom and Dad bought a phone and gave them to Maria in case of need as they were alone at home. Everything was going well, and Maria fell in love with the guy whom she matched with on Instagram. We had no idea for how long she had been in a relationship with them. She never kept anything secret from me except this one. One time, Arian secretly called me and told me about Maria, that she used to chat with someone the whole day long and sometimes video call also. She was my younger sister, but she was in her adulthood also, so I decided to clear the whole thing with her. One particular day after my office hours, I called her and asked about the guy. She told me about everything. His name was Jason, and he belonged to a rich family. I should have stopped her right there and inquired about that guy also, but that was the biggest mistake I made. I thought it was just for some time, and she was right. Then there was nothing wrong with that guy. I didn't put much thought into this matter and let it go. Everything was going well, but after a few months, she always seemed stressed out and depressed. She always sounded low and never told me anything about her problem, even after asking repeatedly. One day, I got a call from an unknown number. I received it, and it was Arian. He was a little tense because it was already evening time and Maria hadn't returned back from her college. I tried to call her again and again, but her phone was switched off. I was tense about her. I called my parents and explained to them the whole situation. They closed the shop and ran back home. They inquired about each and every friend of hers, but no one knew about her. In fact, we got to know that Maria was not going to college for about 10 days. This was when I started to doubt. She always left home saying that she was going to college, but she never reached there then. Where in the hell was she going regularly? We were getting worried about her. My mother started to cry. We decided to go to the police and file a missing report, but before we went, I got an anonymous call on my number. It was some guy who said to me that he had kidnapped my sister and blackmailed me for ransom. He also asked me not to dare to go to the police or he would kill my sister right that instant. We all were scared, so we didn't go to the police. My father ran to the bank to arrange the money, and I also did the same. I had some savings which I had kept in case of an emergency. We took all the money she demanded and left it in the place he asked us to. My father and I were standing a little away from that spot and were waiting for the money. The kidnapper called me and asked me to return home. I asked about my sister, and he said that she will arrive tomorrow morning safe and sound. We had no option but to believe him, so we did. But she didn't return the next morning. I kept on calling on that anonymous number, but the number was out of reach. We understood that we had been cheated. We both ran to the police station and explained the whole situation. They asked me to give them the kidnapper's number. They traced the number and found the last location in just a few minutes. They asked us to accompany them. After about half an hour of driving, we reached the spot where his phone was traced. It was an old warehouse in a totally deserted area, a little far from the town area. The cops asked us to stay in the van and sneaked inside with guns in their hands. I was getting impatient and didn't know why, but I had a strong feeling that something was not right. After a few minutes, one of the officers returned back to us. He asked us to come with them inside. I asked him if they found Maria, but he told me to come with him and see for myself. My dad and I went inside the warehouse. We saw that the cops were standing there. After we reached them, they spaced out, and what I saw almost took my soul out of my body. It was my sister, and she was in pieces. There was blood all around her, and her body parts were cut into several pieces. My dad saw all this and passed out. Suddenly, the cops heard some noise and went on alert. They pulled me and my dad into a corner and left Maria as she was. There were two guys who entered the warehouse from the back door. They didn't have any idea that the cops had already reached there. They came there with a bag in their hand and started packing Maria's body parts into it. I was there all along, watching all this, but I couldn't see this brittleness for long. I pushed the cops and ran to them screaming loudly. I jumped on both of them and started beating them. The cops came and caught them red-handed and took me away from them. I was filled with rage, and I wanted to kill those bastards who did this to my sister. The cops somehow managed to calm me down and took us all back to the police station. They put those kidnappers behind the bars and started beating them until they accepted their sins. He was none other than the guy whom Maria fell in love. They accepted everything and told us about everything they planned. They told us that it was Maria who planned her kidnapping to get money from her own family so that she can marry Jason and they could leave this country. But she had no idea that it was Jason's plan all along to force her to plan her own kidnapping. And once he got the money, he killed her and was about to flee this country without getting noticed. After more investigation, he admitted the whole planning of his crime along with other extortions, like making money from her clients when he was an escort. They got the punishment for their crimes. But in this whole mess, the worst thing was that Maria lost her life to a guy who only played with her for money. Born in London, England, 14-year-old Hannah Williams was living her life normally. Her parents got separated when she wasn't even born. After giving birth, her mother raised her alone as a single parent. Hannah was fond of fashion, and she loved to go shopping in Deptford area where she often went for shopping, so the market traders knew her very well. And on the 21st of April 2001, she went window shopping in Deptford after telling her mom, but little did she know that this could be her last trip. Minutes after leaving home, Hannah received a phone call, but after that, she disappeared. She was also supposed to meet a friend in the evening, but she never showed up. Hannah's mother, Bernadette, called her cell phone multiple times, but she did not answer. She waited several hours for Hannah to return home, but she didn't. When Hannah did not return, her mother reported it to the police, and the search for Hannah began. Confusion rose when one of her friends reported seeing her, so it was presumed that she had run away from home, and search stopped. After a year later, on the 15th of March 2002, when Hannah's mother was watching TV, she saw on the news that a girl's remains had been found. She instantly recognized the clothes to be Hannah's, which she had been wearing before her disappearance. The police were conducting the search for another missing victim, 15-year-old Danielle Jones, who had disappeared on the 18th of June 2001 when she was on her way to school in East Tilbury, Essex. They found a girl's body at cement works in an industrial area of Northfleet, Kent. Apparently, a workman was using a digger in order to clear the dense undergrowth when he saw a dead body. He immediately informed police after it. It was assumed that the found remains are of Danielle, but her mother recognized her on TV and immediately rushed to the scene. The day Hannah disappeared, she was wearing black sleeveless top under a denim jacket. There was a pattern of gold leaves on her top, burgundy trousers, a gold chain, and 2 gold ear studs. The final DNA reports, even after post-mortem being inconclusive, confirmed that the found body is Hannah's. Media was silent for a few days, but then again, they started reporting that it is possible that the found body could be of Danielle Jones, the 15-year-old middle school girl who was gone missing a year ago. During the investigation, police found that right after she went to the shopping trip, Hannah received a phone call by the phone of a woman named Mary Skolin. The woman had an affair with Hannah's father and had been her friend after that. She was living with a man named Robert Howard back in 1999. That was when she introduced him to Hannah. He had previously been involved in multiple sex crimes and had a record about it, and Skolin had no idea about that. 8 days after the discovery of Hannah's dead body, police arrested Robert Howard on the 23rd of March 2002. According to a site, Mirror Online, police believe that Howard lured Hannah using 13-second call by Mary Skolin's device. Howard abducted her and raped her. When Hannah fought back in attempts to free herself from him, he strangled her by a blue rope. After killing Hannah, Howard wrapped her body in a tarpaulin and threw her in a tunnel in the abandoned Circle Cement Works in North Fleet. The blue rope was still tied around her neck when the body was found. Miss Skolin did not know about the crime history of her new boyfriend Howard, and when Hannah went to see her at her home on Montagham, South London, Hannah encountered Howard and was introduced by Miss Skolin. After Hannah Williams' body was discovered and Robert was arrested on the 23rd of March 2022, the trials began, and during the trial, his sex criminal history was revealed. He had been a sex offender of several cases throughout his life. Robert Howard was born on the 20th of April 1944 in a village named Wolf Hill in County Loyalist, Republic of Ireland. His first conviction was at the age of 13 for burglary. He attempted to rape a 6-year-old girl in London at the age of 19. After that, he was sent to prison for burglary and attempted rape in Cork. Robert was also suspected in several disappearance cases of women and girls. Jojo Dolan of Callan and Annie McCarrick of New York Tourist was also one of the cases he was suspect of. McCarrick was disappeared in 1993. It was the same year when Howard was convicted of unlawful carnal knowledge of a girl under 17 in the rape case of a 16-year-old girl in Castlederg, County Tyrone in Northern Ireland. Robert was on bail on the 14th of August 1994, and the 15-year-old Arlene Arkinson went missing in Bondurant, County Donegal. Her body was never found, and she was presumed dead. It was reported that Arlene was last seen with Robert in a car. He was arrested 6 weeks after the disappearance of Arlene. Robert Howard was found guilty at his trial at Maidstone Crown Court in October of 2003 for the rape and murder of Hannah Williams. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with no minimum term. He was again held for trial in 2005 on charges of murdering Arlene Atkinson. An inquest was begun into Arlene's death in February 2016, which included the testimony of his earlier offenses. The testimony claimed him to be extremely dangerous to Arlene at the time of her disappearance. Another inquest found him guilty of Arlene's murder in 2021 and was ruled that he should have been arrested immediately. Howard spent the rest of his life in prison and was found dead at the age of 71 on the 2nd of October 2015. Hannah's case was discussed by criminologist Professor Fiona Brookman in a 2005 book titled Understanding Homicide. She said, Hannah's disappearance never attracted the kind of headlines that followed the disappearance of Danielle Jones, a 15-year-old schoolgirl who went missing 2 months after Hannah's disappearance, nor the widespread media coverage of the disappearance of the Millie Dowler at 13 years old. Despite the best efforts of the National Missing Persons Helpline to generate significant media coverage of all vulnerable missing persons, the media only tends to focus on particular cases that fit in with their publications. The vulnerable cases which generate the great publicity tend to be those where the missing person is white, female, from a middle-class, 2-parent stable family, and there's no indication that the young person may have run away. Hannah did not fit all these criteria. She was not the model middle-class schoolgirl. Rather, she was from a working-class background. Her parents were estranged, and she wore a stud in her nose.
Last summer, I was 21 years old and enjoying a family vacation at Myrtle Beach. We were staying in a high-rise resort, positioned somewhere around the 13th or 14th floor in a timeshare unit. One particular night, restlessness took hold of me. I found myself tossing and turning, unable to find the comfort of sleep. By 3 a.m., the quiet of the room became stifling. Consequently, I decided to step out onto the balcony to breathe in some fresh night air. The sight from the balcony was breathtaking. A full moon hung in the sky, casting a brilliant, shimmering path of light across the ocean waves. Looking down, I noticed the beach was entirely deserted, a rare sight for such a popular destination. The stillness was captivating. Since sleep remained elusive, I figured a short walk on the sand might help me relax. I planned to listen to some music and clear my head, hoping that a bit of physical activity would finally make me tired enough to rest. In hindsight, it was a foolish and unsafe decision to head out alone at that hour. However, because my family was fast asleep, I chose not to wake anyone or leave a note. I rationalized the choice by telling myself I would only be gone for 10 or 15 minutes. I just wanted a quick moment of solitude before returning to bed. The base of our resort featured a pool area and an outdoor bar. Beyond that, 2 separate boardwalks, spaced about 100 feet apart, led through the tall seagrass and down to the shore. When I reached the ground level, the resort grounds were as empty as the beach had appeared from above. I chose the boardwalk on the right and began making my way toward the water. As I walked down the wooden path, a figure appeared, coming from the direction of the beach. This caught me off guard because I had just scanned that very area from my balcony and hadn't seen a single soul. My pulse quickened slightly as the person drew closer. Under the dim glow of the outdoor bar lights, I could see it was a man, likely in his late 30s. He wore a backpack and a pair of glasses with large, square frames. He looked incredibly tense and alert, scanning his surroundings as if he were searching for someone or expecting a clandestine meeting. His clothes appeared tattered and worn. As we crossed paths, we made brief eye contact. I gave him a small, polite nod and continued past him, but a wave of unease washed over me. He reminded me strangely of Jeffrey Dahmer because of those glasses, and he didn't look like someone who was staying at a high-end resort. I tried to dismiss the feeling, putting my headphones in to focus on the music. Upon reaching the sand, I turned right and began walking parallel to the ocean. I took off my shoes and moved closer to the shoreline so I could feel the cool water on my feet. I walked for about a minute, trying to enjoy the scenery. A sudden, primal instinct told me that something was wrong. I pulled my headphones down and glanced over my shoulder. A dark figure was trailing me further up the shore, positioned strategically between me and the resort. Based on the man's height and movement, I knew immediately it was the same person I had passed on the boardwalk. Panic began to set in, and my mind flooded with every horror story I had ever heard. Still, I tried to remain logical. I told myself it might just be a coincidence. Perhaps the man had simply decided to take a walk as well, and happened to be moving in the same direction. To calm my nerves, I took a few deep breaths and turned my gaze back toward the horizon, maintaining my pace. After a few more seconds, I checked again. My heart sank when I realized he had closed the gap significantly. He wasn't just walking parallel to me anymore. He was angled directly toward me. I quickened my pace, and to my horror, he immediately matched my speed, continuing his diagonal path toward the water's edge. A part of me tried to deny the reality of the situation. I thought that maybe he just preferred walking by the water and wasn't actually stalking me. Seeking to confirm my theory, I performed a complete 180-degree turn and started walking the opposite way. As I turned my head, I saw him mirror my movement perfectly. He was now power walking, aggressively closing the distance between us. The gravity of the situation finally hit me. I broke into a full run along the shoreline. He immediately began running too. He stayed higher up on the beach, cutting off my path to the resort boardwalks. If I tried to head for safety, he would be able to intercept me before I reached the stairs. With no clear plan, I simply kept running. I was young and relatively fit, so I hoped I could outlast him. I hoped I could find another exit further down the beach and eventually find a way back to the road or call for help. We ran like that for what felt like 15 minutes. The most terrifying aspect was the absolute silence of the night. There was no wind, no voices, only the sound of my own heavy breathing and the rhythmic thud of my feet hitting the wet sand. Every time I looked back, his shadowy figure was there, keeping pace and lurking in the darkness upshore. Eventually, I spotted a small, flickering blue light ahead on the sand. As I got closer, I saw a group of 4 people sitting on a blanket. They were positioned higher up on the beach. I decided to make a break for them, thinking that even if he tried to cut me off, I could reach them first. I hoped that by alerting them, we could confront the man together. I used the last of my energy to sprint toward the group. However, as I arrived, my hope vanished. The scene was one of total intoxication. There were 4 men surrounded by several large bottles of liquor. Most were empty, and the last was nearly gone. 3 of the men were completely passed out, unresponsive to the world. The 4th man was barely upright, wearing a party hat adorned with blue LED lights. He was mumbling to himself, his eyes glazed over and half closed. He didn't even notice me standing 5 feet away from him. I looked back and saw that my pursuer had slowed down. He was watching me, and I could almost see him processing the state of the group. Realizing they were no threat to him and no help to me, he suddenly began sprinting toward me again. As he entered the glow of the blue party lights, his face became clear. He looked manic, his eyes wide and fixed on me as he barreled forward at full speed. I knew I had to do something drastic. I had exhausted myself sprinting to the drunk group. I feared that, in a long-distance race, he might eventually overtake me. Instead of turning and running away from him, I suddenly lunged forward, sprinting directly toward him and then veering sharply to the right. The move caught him completely off guard. He stumbled as he tried to adjust his momentum, allowing me to slip past him. I didn't look back. I just ran with every ounce of strength I had left toward the resort. The adrenaline was overwhelming. It felt like one of those nightmares where a killer is inches away from grabbing you. Every hair on my neck was standing on end. As the resort loomed closer, I finally dared to glance over my shoulder. He was still following, but he was now 400 or 500 feet behind me. He had lost significant ground. I didn't slow down for a second. I raced up the boardwalk and burst into the resort area. I reached the elevators and pounded the buttons until the doors opened. Once inside, I frantically mashed the closed door button, gasping for air as the metal sliders finally met. When I reached my floor, I sprinted down the hallway, fumbled with my key, and practically fell into the room. I slammed the door, engaged the deadbolt, and leaned against the wood, trembling. I stayed on the floor for a long time, my chest heaving, trying to process the terror of the last 30 minutes. I eventually crawled to my bedroom, staying low to the floor because I was terrified he might be able to see me through the balcony glass from somewhere outside. Needless to say, I stayed awake until the sun came up and I never went for a late night walk alone again.